Hey everyone, welcome. Today we're diving into an explainer that explores the unseen forces shaping Indian society. We are going to journey all the way from the micro-level intimacy of the family right up to the macro-level fractures that can divide a nation. It's a fascinating topic, so let's jump right in. Here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We're going to start with the institution of marriage, look at modern shifts, and navigate modern relationship agreements. Then, we pivot to understanding communalism, its stages, and finally, forms of communal division. Let's get started. All right, Section 1, the institution of marriage. We usually think of marriage through this super romantic or religious lens, right? But sociologically speaking, it's actually a highly calculated social institution. It is essentially a collection of cultural practices, socially approved by laws and customs, with one massive primary goal: guaranteeing the survival of the family. This social approval is literally the fabric holding community structures together. So when we break down the types of this institution, a pretty stark contrast pops up. We have monogamy, which is partnering with just one person at a time, and that's the legally permitted and practiced norm in India today. On the flip side, there's polygamy, which is having more than one partner simultaneously. And while, sure, it has historical precedent in various cultures, it is legally prohibited under modern Indian frameworks. Moving on to Section 2, modern shifts in marriage. Okay, so the modern starting line for all of this is strictly codified by law. Right now, the legal age of marriage sits at 21 for men and 18 for women. That sets the absolute baseline for entering this social contract. But getting married is really only half the story, isn't it? Staying married is the other half. And we're seeing a massive shift in modern sociology here. Divorce rates are climbing, especially in urban areas. Why? Well, it's really driven by a surge in individuality, self-dependency, and the decline of the traditional joint family. Without that built-in guidance you'd normally get from elder generations in a nuclear unit, modern marriages are facing entirely new challenges when it comes to stability. And this shift towards individuality, it's fundamentally changed how people choose to partner up. Back in 2010, there was this landmark observation by the Supreme Court of India. A 3-judge bench basically held that a man and a woman living together without being married cannot be construed as an offense. In fact, they said it's protected right under the right to life and liberty in Article 21. That was a huge legal awakening to the realities of modern relationships. And the legal evolution absolutely didn't stop there. Jump to 2022, and the Supreme Court expanded its observation on what actually constitutes a family even further. We're talking recognition for domestic partnerships, unmarried live-in arrangements, and queer same-sex relationships. Especially in Tier 1 cities, the legal definition of family is finally expanding to catch up with social reality and youth inclination. Which brings us to Section 3, navigating modern relationship agreements. Now, you've probably been hearing a lot about prenuptial agreements lately, but here is a truly fascinating caveat. Prenups are not actually legally tenable in India. Why is that? Well, it's because Indian law doesn't consider marriage to be just a simple contract. While the terms of a prenup might be considered, they absolutely cannot supersede religiously based personal codes. So, for example, the Hindu Marriage Act of 1955 already dictates the rules for divorce, spousal support, and child custody. A private contract simply cannot override those established laws. So, how do couples navigate this? There are 3 main legal avenues used today, and they are completely defined by their timing. First, a prenuptial agreement happens before marriage to outline assets, though, like we just talked about, enforcement is tricky. Then you have a separation agreement, which happens while living apart, focusing on practical things like support, maintenance, and child custody. And finally, a settlement agreement. This is used for ending the marriage entirely without court intervention, provided there is mutual consent. So timing and intent really are everything here. All right, shifting gears entirely. Section 4, understanding communalism. Pivoting from the micro level of the family, we now have to look at a major macro level social fracture: communalism. What is it? Basically, it's the restrictive, sectarian use of one religious group against other groups and nations. Sociologically speaking, it's often an unfavorable, reactionary backlash to the modernizing process. It acts as this unseen force of orthodoxy and intolerance that fractures communities right along religious lines. And communalism isn't passive. It's a very active, multi-dimensional process. It promotes hatred towards other religions and advocates for the abolition of their principles. It often utilizes extremist strategies and violence, maintaining an exclusive outlook of religious superiority. In India specifically, this force is deeply, tragically tied to colonial history and the severe scars of the partition massacres. Let's break down how this develops in Section 5, the stages of communalism. Communalism doesn't just happen overnight. Let's step through this progression. It starts at the initial stage, where people of the same religion simply share similar secular, political, and cultural interests. Seems pretty benign, right? But then it shifts to the moderate stage. This is where the secular interests of one religion start to differ and vary from those of another faith. Finally, it escalates to the extreme stage. This is where the interests between communities are no longer just different, they're actively perceived as aggressive, unfriendly, and totally incompatible. That step-by-step escalation is exactly how communalism takes root. And that leads into Section 6, forms of communal division. You see, communalism exists on a spectrum. It takes on different forms. On one end, you have assimilationist and retreatist forms. This is where a group might just focus on local community welfare, like education or financial aid, or they might distance themselves from politics entirely. But that spectrum darkens really quickly. Retaliatory communalism actively aims to hurt or injure other religious communities. Separatist forms insist on having a completely distinct political identity. And that ultimately culminates in the most extreme form, secessionist, which actually demands an entirely separate state. Wow, we have covered an immense amount of ground in this explainer today, haven't we? From the intimate bonds of marriage to the macro forces of communal division. To wrap things up, I want to leave you with a really provocative past year question from 2014 to chew on. Here it is. Does the life cycle of a joint family depend more on the economic factors or social values? I want you to think about everything we've just unpacked. How do the shifting social values of individuality we discussed intersect with those broader economic and societal forces? Definitely dig into that question. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.